Hi, I'm Megan Finnerty of USA Today. I'm the founder and director of the Storytellers Project, and we are so appreciative that you're taking a chance on live storytelling and sharing your evening with us. Tonight, we are joining Humana and the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, as well as 5 Americans from across the nation, and they're pretty spread out, because we're here to create community by combating loneliness. We are very excited about our special guest storytellers tonight. Since 2016, the Storytellers Project has brought more than 100 shows a year to communities across the country, but we've canceled our in-person season because it feels unsafe to be together in theaters and spaces where we used to have shows. But we know it feels necessary to be together online, and that is literally what this show is about. Tonight's show is about resiliency in the face of loneliness, connectedness, even from afar. And so tonight we're going to hear from some NASA astronauts and scientific researchers who are investigating the ways that isolation and loneliness can affect our bodies and minds. It is super interesting, and it won't get like too nerdy, but it is going to get real into our feelings. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to introduce our storytellers real quick. They have long titles, so stay with me because these are really accomplished people. We're going to hear from Dr. Emmanuel Urquieta. He's of Sugar Land, Texas. He's the deputy chief scientist of the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, which I'm now just going to call Trish, and he's an assistant professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine and Center for Space Health at Baylor College of Medicine. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Dr. Carl Hilmers is of Houston, Texas, and he's a professor at the Baylor College of Medicine and the Departments of Internal Medicine and Pediatrics and at the Center for Space Medicine, and is a chief medical officer at Hepatitis B Free. He is also an astronaut. And tonight we're not going to call them former astronauts because it's like literally once you're an astronaut, you're just always an astronaut. And you're going to hear a lot more about that later in a minute. Thanks for being here, David. Nicole Stott, thank you, is of St. Petersburg, Florida now, and she is an astronaut and artist, and she is the founder of Space for Art Foundation. She is also a senior technical advisor at ILC Dover Space Systems, so she keeps very busy. Thanks for being here, Nicole.
Nice to be here, thanks.
Dr. Cady Coleman lives in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, and she's an astronaut, and she's currently, which is the coolest job title, the Global Explorer in Residence at ASU, which is right near where I am right now, Arizona State University, and she's a research affiliate at the MIT Media Lab. Thanks for being here, Cady. We'll also have a Q&A with Dr. Dorit Donovel. She's the director of the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, Trish, in Houston, and she's an associate professor at Baylor College of Medicine for Medicine's Center for Space Health there. Thank you for being with us, Dorit.
Excited, thank you.
Yeah, it's going to be an awesome show. So we have a tiny message from Humana about like the big idea behind this show and a special website they're working on.
What do COVID-19 and a trip to space have in common? Isolation. We're all feeling it, most especially America's seniors. Before novel coronavirus, the need for social connectedness was already a pandemic, affecting millions. Now, with lockdowns and quarantines, we're seeing more suffering and more negative effects on our health. You're about to hear first-person stories from NASA astronauts who have worked to be resilient against loneliness. With the help of researchers and scientists from TRISH, the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, you'll learn what each of us can do for ourselves and for the seniors in our lives to connect with each other more in this difficult time and in the future. Brought to you by Humana, we hope you find connection in these entertaining, insightful moments.
So you guys know that Humana sponsors these shows during the outside times, and we're actually really, really grateful to them because they provide the support that enables our newsrooms to bring you these pieces of live journalism. But tonight is also a partnership between Humana and their partners in the show, right? Trish, we mentioned. It's a consortium led by the Baylor College of Medicine in partnership with the California Institute of Technology and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. The Institute funds research and technologies designed to solve the health and human performance challenges of deep space exploration, which is a fancy way of saying it's literally their job to figure out how to get humans to Mars safely and sanely, because it's going to be a really, really long journey. And the whole idea is that they're this partner of NASA's Human Research Program, Why are they helping us during the pandemic? Like, why are these very fancy, smart people here talking about their feelings when we're all stuck at home? Well, it's because they're a partner with Humana in a website and in bringing awareness to the ways that we can still connect to one another, even if it's not safe to like hug everybody or like be out doing things that we normally would. They're part of this coalition to bring attention to social isolation before, during, and after coronavirus. Their website is called farfromalone.com. Genius. Get it? It's a pun, but it's also filled with incredible tips that we will hear about later in the show. It's a new website that has insights and tips about how to stay emotionally connected and resilient, which really matters because across the country, obviously, there's lots of studies and things saying that Americans are lonely, but we're also anxious and we're getting depressed. And this website can help connect you to those resources. These astronauts and scientists are here, though, because they are experts at figuring out there will be no TED Talk. Nobody's going to have a screen. No Toastmasters, not a how-to. They might be inspirational, but they're not here to lecture at you. This is storytelling, and storytelling is based on visiting. You guys know how to visit. You open your heart about the people you're curious about, who you want to feel closer to. That is literally how connecting happens. You've probably been doing it a lot on screens lately. And we invite you to do that here tonight. We want you to know some of these stories are going to be super polished and professional. Astronauts are perfectionists, but others are going to be a little more casual and conversational because that's how real people talk. And we want you to know that we've worked with them and they have volunteered their time to be coached, even though they're total pros at giving talks. They volunteered their time to be coached, to be like vulnerable and accessible to you. So we ask that you receive these stories in the spirit in which they're intended. I'm excited to bring up our first storyteller. Nicole is here with this story. Nicole's here with a story about a moment that set her on a new path, even as she was still on her existing one. Take it away, Nicole.
All right. Thank you. Hi, I'm Nicole. And before I start my story, I'd like to just invite you all tonight, after you hear all of our stories, to continue with something pretty special. Tonight from the International Space Station, 3 of our crew members, NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy and 2 Russian cosmonauts, Anatoly and Ivan, will be coming home after almost 200 days on the space station. They land at 10:55 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can find that online at nasa.gov or on the NASA TV station, hopefully on your TV. And I hope you'll take the time to watch them come back to Earth. So I'll start back to me, I am an artist and an astronaut, and most importantly, I'm a mom. I grew up in Clearwater, Florida, which is just up the street from where I am right now. And I'm proud to say that Clearwater High School is the only high school in the country with 2 astronaut graduates, me and Bruce Melnick. Now, there is rumor that somewhere in New Jersey, there's a high school where the Kelly twins went, but we just don't count that one. So when I think about the path that led me to sitting here with you tonight, I am most thankful for parents who shared what they loved with me, because I realize now what a positive impact that had on my life. My mom is a nurse and has always been very creative. She actually sewed all of mine and my sister's clothes while we were growing up, which I can not even imagine. She has always included us in all or any of the artsy craftsy things that she was doing. And if I was going to get to a ballet lesson or to softball practice, it's because she got me there. My dad loved to build and fly small airplanes. So our family spent a lot of time out at the local airport. I developed a love of flying of my own. I spent a lot of time flying with him. I wanted to fly myself, but more, I wanted to know how things fly. And while I have a vivid memory of watching that moon landing with my family when I was 6, and even then knowing that that was something really extraordinary, I had no idea that one day I would end up in space as an astronaut myself. My love of flying and how airplanes fly led me to studying aeronautical engineering. I earned my private pilot's license right out of high school. And while I was at university, I discovered that if you want to know how airplanes fly, why would you not want to know how rocket ships fly? And after graduating, I was really fortunate to be hired as a NASA engineer at the Kennedy Space Center, working on both the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station programs. And while I was there helping get the space shuttles ready to fly, I had the opportunity to meet a lot of astronauts. And I discovered the fact that 99.9% of an astronaut's job is not flying in space. It's here on the ground. And at least 80% of it, as far as I could tell, seemed a lot like what I was already doing as a NASA engineer. And that's when I started thinking that astronaut might be possible for me. Because until then, I always thought, oh, astronaut, that's something only other special people get to do. Why would they ever pick me? And I almost doubted myself out of such an extraordinary experience. But thankfully, I spoke to a couple people that I consider to be mentors who encouraged me to do the one thing that I had total control of, which was to pick up the pen and fill out the application. To me, the astronaut job was always about more than the adventure. I don't think any of us strap on to 7 million pounds of exploding rocket fuel beneath us because it's just going to be fun. We believe in the greater good of the work we do in space. We know it's helping us explore farther off our planet. But more importantly, that all the work we do in space is about improving life on Earth. And I wanted to be a part of that. So after a couple tries at applying, I was selected into the astronaut class of 2000. The years of preparing for my first space flight were filled with training and supporting the ongoing missions. And the highlights for me were traveling to our partner countries around the world, training there, the expeditionary training events like cold weather survival in Moscow and Canada, Moscow's coldest day in 100 years. And yes, as Cady asked, it was cold. And water survival in the Black Sea during one of their hottest summers on record. It was hot. And an 18-day underwater mission on the Aquarius undersea habitat, the absolute best analog to living and working in space. The one thing that all of our training and work has in common is that it's all centered around us working together as a good team, as a crew. And in all of our training and in the way we fly together, we do it with a here's how we can, not why we can't approach. We believe there's a solution to every challenging problem. And we respect the value that comes from a diverse crew and experiences. The day that you finally get to go to space seems to take forever to arrive. But at the same time, in hindsight, I guess, it seems to arrive like a blur. There's a lot of things to consider, of course, in the final preparation for a space flight. So I'm very thankful for the people who supported us here on the ground to help us pack for the trip. We get a really small bag allotted for personal items. And at the top of my list was my 7-year-old son's little stuffed toy dog named Sports. I also brought my favorite book, West with the Night by Beryl Markham, photographs and little trinkets from my family and friends, and a watercolor paint kit. And all of these items were special to me. And I selected them to help me stay connected to home and what I love. But I think more importantly, for those people at home to feel connected to me and my mission in space. And I think you'll hear tonight that connection is a word that comes to mind a lot when we think about our time in space. While I was on the ISS, the farthest I have ever been from home, looking down on Earth, I felt more connected to everyone and everything below me than I had with my feet planted on the ground. Earth became my home. I remember feeling like I wasn't just seeing the beautiful translucence and iridescence and color of our planet below me, but I was feeling it and I was capturing it with my heart, like it was becoming part of me. And in all the complexity of spaceflight, I was profoundly impacted by 3 simple truths. We live on a planet. We are all Earthlings. And the only border that matters is that thin blue line of atmosphere that blankets and protects us all. Everything is interconnected. We go to space and we live on board a mechanical spacecraft that we've built to mimic as best we can what Earth does for us naturally. While we're there, we are acutely aware that this mechanical spacecraft is our life support system, of how much CO2 is in our atmosphere, if we have enough clean drinking water, the integrity of our thin metal hull, and we have a deep reliance on and appreciation for the value of all of our crewmates. I believe the way we live and work together on the International Space Station is absolutely the best example of how we should be living and working together as crewmates here on Spaceship Earth. So 5 years ago, I made the difficult decision to retire from NASA and start my next mission in life. I kept coming back to the opportunity I had to paint in space and how I might be able to use my art to share the spaceflight experience with others. My hope is that the backstory helps people become aware of the work being done on the space station that, like I've said before, is all about improving life on Earth. and that it helps them, that it helps you make your own connection to the three lessons of planet, earthling, and thin blue line. So I melded the art and space that I love together. And while I've been creating my own artwork, more importantly, I began working on space-themed art therapy projects with kids in hospitals and refugee centers around the world, which then led to the formation of the Space for Art Foundation. At Space for Art, we are uniting a planetary community of children through the awe and wonder of space exploration and the healing power of art. One of the first painting sessions in the hospital with the children really stands out for me. I was sitting next to a beautiful little 8-year-old girl who was undergoing cancer treatment at the hospital. She was wearing a colorful hat because she'd lost all her hair, and she was really, really talkative. And we were painting together on small pieces of fabric for one of our art spacesuits and talking about the stars. And then very matter-of-factly, she looks at me and she says, "You know, Miss Nicole, what you do as an astronaut seems a lot like the treatment that I'm going through in the hospital." And I was really shocked by this. But I asked her, I smiled and kept painting, and I asked her to tell me what she meant. And she kept on painting and said, you can't see your family and friends the same way. You can't just go outside anytime you want. You have to eat different foods. They're doing all kinds of tests on you. Your body's changing. And I think you have the radiation too. I mean, holy moly. She was so right. Her words really impacted me. I left the hospital that day feeling like there is no way that she could possibly be as inspired by an astronaut as I was by her beyond her years, wisdom and strength. This little girl really touched my heart. This was the day I discovered my new mission. I realized then that I'd been blessed with the opportunity to fly in space so that I could come back to Earth and work on these projects with these children. And it makes perfect sense to me now. We should always be looking for ways to use our experiences to help make life better. Thank you.
Nicole, thank you. First of all, thank you for shouting out to your colleagues.
Yeah.
But also, seriously, but thank you so much for that reflection on, I loved when you talked about how it was a way that you could help others feel closer to you by taking their objects with you. And I thought, I didn't see that coming. I think that's a really beautiful idea. I know we practice these stories, but thank you so much. And I also thank you for the example of your continued service through art. The last thing I want to know.
Share.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And everyone, in Nicole's story, she points out how we can all learn from each other, right? In that hospital room that day, your life was changed by a fellow, by just another human there. And I'm sure you thought, oh, I'm the science person who's here to teach or share. And I think it's a beautiful idea. So,
thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. Thanks for starting off our show. Well, we mentioned before, that Humana has stayed with us during the our virtual season. And it's really because they fundamentally believe that sharing stories creates the kinds of connections that lead to emotional health and physical health. And they know we need these connections now more than ever. As the pandemic continues to evolve, Humana is committed to the health and safety and well-being of all the communities that it serves. Again, that's why they want you to check out farfromalone.com for helpful information and tips for how to feel specifically socially connected. They really want to promote greater understanding of loneliness and a destigmatization. So we're going to hear about that a little bit more later in the show. But this is just my moment to say thank you so much for supporting the Storytellers Project at USA Today. It allows us to do this work. I'm excited to introduce Emmanuel. He's here. He had a really life-changing experience that so few people get to have, and he's going to tell us about it. Take it away.
Thank you. Well, as you have heard, my name is Emmanuel. I am a dad, I am a husband, and I'm a first-generation immigrant and a scientist. And my story today is about, it goes back to 2016 when I volunteered to spend 30 days in a simulated tin can with 3 strangers. So you might ask yourselves, why would somebody volunteer to do something like this? Well, as you were hearing from Nicole on the previous talk, spacecraft and spaceflight is difficult. And as we are looking into traveling to Mars and to deep space, the astronauts are going to be really isolated. This is a mission that is going to take about 3 years. So it's very difficult to simulate these conditions on space or even on Earth. So NASA and other space agencies have these specific places that they're called analogs. And I was lucky enough to spend 30 days inside one of them here in Houston. It's called a Human Exploration Research Analog. Like I was telling you, this is a very small spacecraft. It's about a simulated spacecraft. It's about 600 square feet. It's about the size of an average apartment in New York. To give you a little bit of an idea of how it looks inside, it has cameras all over the place. It has microphones everywhere. There's no privacy. And one of the most important things that we get to simulate there is no communications or very delayed communications. When astronauts go to Mars, there's going to be about 40 minutes of time delayed communications. Let's say that you want to call your mom or your dad back on Earth. You grab the phone, you say, hey, mom, hey, dad. It's going to take 20 minutes for the communications to come back to Earth. And then when your mom or your dad answers, it's going to take 20 minutes to go back to Mars. So a lot of the operations and the medical issues that could potentially happen in these missions need to be tested in these types of analogs, so that when we send astronauts to Mars, we know that all of the medical and like they were mentioning before, some of the behavioral aspects that are one of the most difficult to solve, we have really good tools to provide to the astronauts when they go to these missions. So inside these simulated spacecraft, there's full isolation. There's no windows, there's no daytime, and there's no nighttime because the light is pretty constant and pretty steady inside. The other thing is that the temperature is constant and there's no breeze. Also, the smell is pretty steady all the time. And we get to eat some of the meals that astronauts eat in space. So you get there, they close the hatch, and you know that you're going to be 30 days inside that simulated spacecraft. In my case, this was, again, I was telling you, back in 2016, and my wife Ashley and I had my older daughter, Maddie, and she was about 2 years old back then. And this was the first time that we were separated for 30 days, and pretty much the longest time that we have ever been separated. So that was one of the hardest things from a personal standpoint when I was in this simulated mission. Now, when you volunteer to do these things, you do them, of course, for the greater good. In my case, I was doing this to volunteer and to give my time, so that the small time that I spent there could be useful for real astronauts, like you heard from Nicole and from the other two astronauts that you will hear after my talk. So you really don't realize the things that you are giving away, and a lot of the things that you actually take for granted every single day. And I think that a lot of the things that I will be telling you are very relevant in this COVID situation. Most of us have been isolated for 9 months. We have been giving away a lot of the things that we like, going out, spending time with family and friends. But there are a lot of things that we still take for granted. Like, for example, smelling the grass outside when you are cutting your grass and you can smell the grass. Just coming to your house and smelling the way that your house specifically smells. Talking to your family. Like just enjoying your favorite dish, your favorite food. Enjoying a hot cup of coffee. So these things are what we normally do every day, and we usually take for granted. And on a personal standpoint, when I was doing this simulated mission, I was more appreciative of these type of things that we day by day normally do. Now, before this mission started, the day before the mission started, the three other team members and myself went to have barbecue. We were in Texas. We are in Texas, and you know that we love our barbecue here in Texas. So we went there, and we all agreed that if anybody had any issues with anybody else, if there was somebody that the other person wouldn't like, we will be really open with this. You have to realize that this was a very small place. There were no windows, and there was no privacy. So you cannot just go to the corner and just spend your time there while you vent or while you feel better from something that another of the crew members didn't. He or she did something you didn't like. You cannot do that. On top of that, I was telling you, there's cameras, there's microphones, there's people looking at you all the time. So we all agreed that if somebody else said something and did something that you didn't like, you would be completely open on that. And that's actually not very difficult to do. What is difficult to do is for the other person taking your comments, not to take them personal. We usually take things personal, and we need to understand how the other person is telling us those comments and where the other person is coming from. In this type of setting where you are, again, isolated and confined, and this goes back to how most of us have been dealing with COVID for the last 9 months, we are a team. in most of in our households, we're a family. Maybe we have a wife, a husband, sons, daughters. Maybe you live with your mom, with your dad, with cousins or any other family members. And yes, we're a family, but we're also a team. So anything that we say, anything that we don't think before we say, could have a lot of mental and a lot of behavioral issues on the other person. And the other person will secondarily have repercussions on the entire team or the entire family. So one of the things that I learned here is to think before I say something. So that was something very useful. And I think that is something very, very applicable during this COVID situation. Now, the other thing that I learned in this simulated mission was that I love coffee. And again, are the things that we take for granted. I am a huge coffee drinker. I wake up in the morning at 8 a.m. I have my first cup of coffee, and probably at 10 a.m. I have my second one. And as a matter of fact, before I was talking to you today, I was having my last cup of coffee. So part of the things that we simulated in this mission was how somebody could stay awake for long periods of time without drinking coffee or other things that would potentially keep you awake. And I remember accepting that I was going to do these things when I volunteered to do this simulated mission. But it was not until it was very late one of these days, and I was probably getting a little bit grumpy because I couldn't have my coffee, and I was starting to get a headache. So again, what really helped in this situation was the fact that the rest of the teammates in this simulated mission, we knew that we would be pretty open to each other. So I told them, okay, I'm getting a little bit grumpy. I'm having a headache. There's nothing personal here. It's just that I cannot have my coffee and I just don't feel right. So I think that being open with these type of things, with in this case with the other crew members, and in most of our cases with our family members in our households, could really de-escalate something that could go to the other side, and I think could make things easier and more livable day after day as we keep being isolated. As the mission was progressing and we were getting until the last days, before they opened the hatch, the simulated spacecraft is inside a huge hangar at NASA Johnson Space Center. So before they opened the hatch on day 30, I remember we're ready to get out of there. Actually, it's weird because we were actually a little bit sad of leaving, because you get a lot of experiences with the rest of the people inside, and you really become a team and a family. So even though you're really looking forward to leave and to see your family and go back to eat real food, there's that part of you that is feeling a little bit sad from leaving from there, because all the experiences that you get to develop there. So they opened the hatch. Of course, my wife Ashley and my daughter Madeline were there waiting for me. There were probably 20 or 30 other people outside. Some astronauts were there just to see how we're leaving the analog. And they were doing this at night so that our eyes were able to adapt to looking at a far distance, because this tin can is small, so your eyes get used to only looking at close distances and not far distances. And then the following day, I remember we went to the grocery store, and I was feeling a little bit agoraphobic. I was a little bit afraid of open spaces. And I mean, honestly, a grocery store is not an open space. But compared to this tiny place, it is an open space. So it only took a couple days to get my vision back to normal, to be able to drive, and to go back to really the normal world. So in my case, this is the farthest that I can be, that I have been. And I hope that some of the things that I shared with you today are useful during this pandemic, and makes your lives easier and makes your families better. Thank you.
Emmanuel, thank you so much for your story and your self-awareness. I so appreciate it. When Emmanuel first told his story, everyone, he was like, okay, I know how I changed. And I was like, wait, you are more thoughtful about being like giving compassionate feedback. And I just thought, this guy, he should teach classes. Like this is, yes, this is the key to friendship and marriage and work and everything else. Like he and you like were so funny and natural about it. And so I really appreciate, we really appreciate your advice and your sense of humor about it.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. Awesome. You guys, we have another little PSA for you here. Take just a second.
Even astronauts trained and equipped for spending long periods alone can experience the negative health effects of loneliness or social isolation. Here on Earth, it happens to everyone at one time or another. But even before COVID-19, loneliness had reached epidemic proportions. Today, 1 in 5 Americans reports feeling lonely often. The reality is 1 in 3 for seniors. The pandemic has brought our attention to the issues of loneliness, but we can do something about it. By simply increasing their social connections, we can help our friends and our loved ones, especially the older adults in our lives, to improve their health and achieve a better quality of life. Join Humana and its partners to raise awareness and make a difference. Visit farfromalone.com to learn how to help.
We were really excited about this show because the Storytellers Project was built to be a machine against loneliness. You might be watching us or discovering us for the first time, but we started in 2011 in Phoenix, where I live. And I founded it because there was like a real kind of anxiety and what I describe as like a loose ends sadness in my life at that time. And it's something I saw in others. It was 2011. So like, at least in my community, the recession hadn't totally ended. We hadn't really bounced back fully. And I just remembered thinking like, man, I feel so disconnected sometimes and I can't be the only one. And that's really what tonight's show feels so important, because it's like literally designed to help you feel less alone in your head and maybe less alone and alienated in your everyday life, which I think is like kind of hard for Americans to talk about sometime. And so that's why we're so grateful for all of these people to like talk about it and tackle it head on. And the big idea is that like whether your situation feels totally temporary, like you were fine before pandemic and like this is just a little weird, or if it's something more persistent, like maybe you're prone to loneliness, which like I am and some of the people I love are, thoughtful support can really make a difference. And sometimes it's just like best practices and tips like the ones we're hearing about on today's show, like be gentle when you give feedback to the people you love. And sometimes it's more personal help and bigger help. On farfromalone.com, you're going to be able to hear information to help yourself and maybe your loved ones feel more socially connected, including really practical stuff from the Institute on Aging. And they have a toll-free phone number. It's a friendship line, which is a real thing. You can call it, or you can encourage someone you love to call it. It's just a place to call to have a friendly conversation, which is super neat. Also on farfromalone.com, there's a toolkit, and it's a way to help you understand loneliness if you're like, oh, I'm uncomfortable about that idea. But if you understand it and you know what social isolation looks like, you can take that on in your community, your friendship group, or with the older adults you know. Because like we said, like 1 in 3, that's a lot of people. But the website can also connect you directly more to your neighbors or volunteer opportunities and more. It is really a hub for people if you're experiencing loneliness or if you want to be one of the people that helps others fight loneliness. And lastly, if you want to learn about how to join Humana and Trish and the whole Far From Alone coalition, they are looking for partners. So we're really excited to do our little part here tonight on this show. But if you go to the website, you can see like what's your part to do and what difference can you make in your community. So with that, we'd like to bring up our third storyteller. Cady is here to reflect on the jillions of ways that she's created connection, both as a parent, a worker, an everyday person. Cady's got a lot of experience in this department. Take it away.
Megan, thank you. It's already been just so wonderful to be listening to everybody else's stories. And I think it's a great tradition to start having space stories. It's about the future. So I thought I'd share some of mine. There is nothing like blasting off into space for a 6-month expedition to the International Space Station to make you think about what is the meaning of far and what is the meaning of near and how do we make connections when we're in these places. I loved actually almost every minute of my time on the space station, might even have stayed longer. Actually, I would have if I could. And I did miss my family a lot. I missed being with my family. But, I think there's ways to find a way to be together. So I'd like you to bring you to the space station. For me, nighttime, late at night, was my favorite time, where I'd have already finished work, I've eaten dinner, I've gotten ready for the next day, talked to my family, and pretty much the rest of the crew is either maybe asleep, but it's my time to go to the cupola and say one last, good night to the Earth, and maybe, a good night to the space station too. And so I would crack open my cabin door, and I would give myself a push, and I'd do that long glide down the laboratory. It's lit in twilight at nighttime. And I'd come into node 1, and I'd sort of hook a right, go into node 3. That's where some of the really important stuff is, which is the treadmill, the weightlifting machine, the all-important bathroom, and then straight on up into the cupola, which is our sort of domed set of windows to be able to look out at the Earth and at space. And when I was there, I loved looking like at the curve of the Earth, because then there's just no question. You are in a spaceship and you are orbiting the Earth. And then if you look down, to me, it was pretty neat to think about, what everybody was doing down there, and just wondering, how life was, and wondering if they understood that I just really wasn't that far away. And in fact, it's the times that I felt the most close to Earth, really. Some of my favorite moments up there in the cupola would be when I'd look at the world map and I'd realize that we're going to go over my home in Massachusetts. And so I would call my husband and my son and tell them what time. They would like run out into the yard. We live in Western Mass, so it's really a great dark sky. And I knew that they'd be down there looking up at the sky, at the stars, and you're looking to see, is that one moving? No, not that, not that. And then suddenly one of them, and it's going to be like the brightest one, is just sailing across the sky. And that would be the space station. And I'd be in the space station, looking down, waving, and knowing that they're waving at me. And it just was a really special moment. And we still actually go out in the backyard and see the space station and think about the folks that are up there. And I really urge you to do it, because it just really connects you to that place when you realize that there's just really people up there. Well, I'm actually no stranger to trying to figure out how to be close to people because I'm far away. And that is because I commuted between Houston and Massachusetts for 24 years, a really, really long time. And when you work in all the training that we do, the reason for that is that I found a wonderful guy that I fell in love with and got married to in Massachusetts. And yet I didn't really want to give up my cool job. So I commuted for a really long time. And somehow we just made that, our way of life. And it included training around the world, at different places for different missions, a couple weeks in an underwater habitat, like Nicole mentioned, and then even a few months in Antarctica, about 200 miles from the South Pole, in a tent. And I am not a camping girl, okay? I'm just going to make that very clear. But wherever I was in the world, and however far away I was, if I went outside at night and I looked at the moon, it just made me, and knowing that Josh and Jamie could go and be looking at the very same moon, and that together, we're like joined together right there. And it just made us feel closer. It's a little trickier in Antarctica because the sun never went down, but that was problematic. After all these time zones that I was in, my husband used to say that he really loved it when I finally made it to the space station and was going to stay there a good long time, because then he knew exactly where I was, because there's an app for that. So to each their own. Well, when I was up there on the space station, one of the things that it becomes really clear is that you really can't go home, but you can stay connected. And for me, having a way to call my family, not just like once a week or something, but whenever I wanted, was perfect. And we had an internet protocol phone, and we could call almost, all day long, except of course, we're too busy working for that. But I talked to my family probably every day, except for about 3 out of 159. And it sounds really great until you think about a phone call with a 10-year-old. And so you go, hey, sweetie, how are you? Good. Well, and so how was your day? Good. And so it's not as perfect as it might seem. And at the same time, just nice to be in touch. But also what we did, and I really learned it during training, was we would read books aloud together almost every night. And I think it just gave us a place to be together and not really have to sort of do anything. And our favorite book was Peter and the Starcatchers. And I think it was because in that book, it's like the life of Peter Pan before Peter Pan. So people are flying, all the rules are different. And I think that he and I got to explore that world together. We also had video conferences once a week. And that was really this privilege, this huge privilege, because there's something about video. And if you ever have the chance, I mean, I know we get into just being on the phone, but often video just gives you more clues about how people really are, what they're doing, how they seem. So I loved these video conferences, and I would often bring my son's little Hobbes. This is a little tiger. I don't know if you're familiar with Calvin and Hobbes. It's a cartoon where it's a boy and his tiger, and they're quite adventurous. They love to explore, and they're crazy about space. So of course they go to Mars, in one of the books. And so I would have Hobbes up on the space station, and I would actually take him and send him. That's kind of our space verb, sending. I would send him down the module under the ever watchful cameras of Mission Control, wondering if anybody just noticed this little tiger sort of sailing by. So I would get to tell Jamie about these exploits. And Hobbes was really a favorite of ours, but it was a favorite of the crew as well, because if we ever made like a really big mistake, we would, of course, fess up, except that we would blame it on the tiger, bad tiger. So I'll never forget. I don't know. I think we love exploration in our family, and our son came to us, and he had a backpack, and in his backpack he had a sandwich, he had an apple, and he had a toy. And he goes, "Mom and Dad, I'm going to go explore, and I'll be back when I'm done." Which I just thought was, I think that's pretty neat that he would have that kind of spirit. And truthfully, I hoped that he realized that, his mom went off to explore a lot, and that she always came back as well. Well, our space family is really a special thing as well. So we have sort of Earth family, but then space family. And with space family, there's actually a different challenge, which is not the distance, but in some ways the closeness. And often people think that we are put together as a crew of 6 because we're going, we're each, going to be compatible. Oh, they'll like working with them. That'll be really nice. It's a myth. It just can't be true. Mostly just logistics. We need somebody who's doing spacewalks, somebody with robotics and science, whose turn it is, what country's turn it is to send astronauts. And when you put that whole equation together, we're going to have 6 people that are actually all there for the same mission. And that is truly the saving grace, because we all have different kinds of traits that may or may not be attractive to the others. I myself am talkative, and somehow not everybody appreciates how very special that is to have somebody talkative with them all the time. But we had, luckily, the space station itself, you might think it's small, but it's actually big. It's huge. We have 2 bathrooms. We have 2 kitchens, a ton of laboratories, and you can actually work there all day if you and not see other people if you're really sort of off in one corner of the station or not. But we often would come together for meals. And I think that there was a lot of diplomacy and ways that we connected over food. I would say the most important things to really keep in mind or to think about were there was meat, there was the good coffee, and there was chocolate. Now, as someone who is not a really big meat fan, that meant that I had a very special strategic advantage in this equation. But I called this steak for borscht diplomacy, because food was just something that we all kind of had could joke around about. And the other thing that I thought would be hard, but turned out to be actually easy, was what are we going to do together when we're not working that, we can all enjoy when we have, 6 people and 4 countries and 5 languages. And, it just doesn't seem like you could find a movie or a TV show that would really work for everybody. But then there it was, American Idol. And everyone had opinions. Well, I think things like food and TV might seem silly or like they don't matter, but I think they're actually the sort of beginning of the fabric of weaving a crew together. And excuse me, during our time on the space station, there's something that happened for us that I think probably changed all of us forever. And that was that our crewmate Paolo Nespoli lost his mom unexpectedly due to illness. And we don't go to space with sort of a manual about how to help each other, really. And this may be something that you feel at home too, with all the things that we're going through. And we really wanted to support Paolo. So I went to him and I just said, Paolo, we'd like to help. What can we do? And he said, I'm actually, I'm okay. I mean, I wish I could be there, but I understand that I can't. And, I'm okay here. But what is hard for me is that down on the ground, I think it's really hard for my family and for my friends. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to really just let them know, I see you. I am there with you. So our crew took the sort of job on to help arrange a way for Paolo to actually speak at his mom's funeral from the space station. And at the right time, we gathered in the cupola, we held hands, and we had the mission controls from around the Earth, or around the world, were all together as well. Paolo made some really moving statements about his mom, and we had a moment of silence all together. And then amazingly, the space station went directly over Paolo's hometown in Italy. So it just seemed like fate. And, like our other speakers, I think one of my points is that, we're all so connected to the Earth. And even if you go further away, there's still those things that tie you together. And for us, especially with our ground team, it's that way. They're an extension of our space family, and they're just as much a part of the mission as any of the astronauts. I was especially close to mission control in Japan because I was the second person to capture one of their supply ships from the space station using the robotic arm and then sticking it on the space station. And Nicole Stott, who just spoke earlier, was the very first one to do this. And I will never forget when we went to mission control, when Nicole, that was her introduction to the Japanese mission control team. We walked in and just spontaneously, they all rose with one motion and out. And I still get chills just thinking about it. And in that very moment, I knew that I would never be capturing a supply ship by myself because we were one team. So Nicole's crew captured the very first. Kunatori is the name of the supply ship, which means white crane. And so she captured the very first one, and then it was Paolo's and my turn. And that 16-ton supply ship silently approached the space station. And it was just magnificent, but also, I have to say, scary. I mean, we knew, and because we're in the cupola, we're looking out, we're there at the robotics workstation, we're about to go on the controls. And we knew it would be big. We just didn't know it would be like that big. And I'm actually, I don't know if you'll think it's funny, but I'm often reminded of this sign that you'll see on rearview mirrors. Sometimes it say, objects in the mirror may be larger than they appear. So it was really, I don't know, for us, it was a moment, but we got ourselves together. And actually, I think that's one of the things, like Emmanuel talked about, where you really have to be honest with your crewmates and make sure that you're really, really each other all ready. And so we were together, we were ready. And we took the robotic arm, started in, going towards the spacecraft, 2 pins, 1 pin, over the pin, and capture of the Kunatori spacecraft. There were cheers, there were celebrations, great relief on my part as the operator of the robotic arm. And then we brought it on board. It takes longer to do this, but unpacking, taking out the very coveted care packages from home, as well as supplies and experiments and all those things. But it was really just such a proud day and something that we'd done all together. And now that happens, practically like a couple of times a month. That happens up on our space station. And so I'm very proud that Nicole and I were amongst the first to help figure out how to do that, and with such a great team. Well, a few weeks later, after the capture, the unthinkable happened. And that is that a tsunami struck Japan. It was unbelievable. More than 20,000 people died. mission control was damaged. There were so many people working in mission control, either themselves or their families were affected by this great tragedy. And it was just simply devastating. And it was hard for us to figure out, how can we just go about our day as if like everything's the same, when clearly life is so different for so many people that we care about down there. And one of the things that we did in wanting to help was we took every picture that we could of Japan at night, during the day, every time, trying to sending those pictures down because they served as data for engineers, scientists, people around the world to try to understand the state of the damage in Japan. But we wanted to do more. And we went to our Japanese colleagues and just said, how can we help? And they came back with a very special plan. I told you the name of the supply ship is Kunatori, and it stands for White Crane. Well, they asked us to gather, all of us on the crew, gather in the Japanese module, Japanese part of the space station, and make these origami white cranes, basically we would make these white cranes and to video this process, because these white cranes and the fact that the space program was going strong and was something that Japan was rightfully so very proud of. So we were excited about helping with this project. And I do have to share that we were a little daunted when they sent us 19 pages of directions, but they were very clear directions and it all turned out okay. But I actually have to share that the only thing, and this is from experience, the only thing worse than doing math in public is actually doing origami in public. But I think some of these white cranes are still up on the space station, and it meant really so very much to all of us to know that we were contributing to the mission back down there on the ground, and to find out that the videos that we took were played on billboards across Japan during the rebuilding to provide a sense of hope during the rebuilding. From afar, but not apart. I think that's us. I loved coming home and being back on Earth, but I also, it means a lot to me to bring myself back up onto the space station and go back to some of those moments before bedtime, looking out the cupola window, looking out at Earth, looking out at space, and knowing, looking down there, that it's just so clear to me that there are so many connections that each of us could make with each other, so very many, and that each of us ourselves could make an infinite number of connections. And regardless of whether you're far from people you love or very close to people you love, there's always that moon, our moon. And I love that we see the same moon. Thank you.
Cady, thank you. Oh my gosh, your story contains so many big ideas, so many emotional connections. The one I really want to just take a second to underline is you managed to connect with your son, your husband, your colleagues, and the entire country of Japan. So when I said at the beginning of this that you were an expert, you really are. But something I want to underline for so many of us, what I personally took away from your story, and I hope might be comforting to so many others, is that idea of reading a book with your kiddo, because you said it's not so much about what you communicate, it's that you create the space to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that is really profound, like really helpful. So thank you, Cady, for that, and so many other insights.
Well, thank you. It's really wonderful to be here.
Awesome, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are rounding the bend on this event, and we really appreciate your time and your attention, but we want to introduce you to a behind-the-scenes person. Dr. Dorit Donovel is here, and she helps run TRISH, which we mentioned is the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, which is a very fancy way of saying, Dorit, your institute, thanks for being here. Your institute helps research new health solutions for astronauts that also impact like us, we hope, that it goes way beyond, Tang and microwaves. Can you talk to us a little bit about the features of deep space that might be relevant to us all kind of self-quarantining at home right now?
Yeah, so thanks for that. And it's just been amazing to listen to all these pioneers. So everything that we do in space impacts life on Earth here. And as we've seen here with the pandemic, a lot of the things that we worry about for deep space on how humans will be able to survive and thrive in a small, limited space with very few resources, we're having to do here today in our homes. And so it's definitely applicable. So what we're worried about on that long duration mission to Mars is we learned so much from the astronauts that you heard today, and you'll hear more from David Hilmers as well, about how to live in space. Our bodies do quite well. But that longer mission to Mars, nobody's ever gone that far away from home for essentially 3 years without being able to have resupply ships that Nicole and Cady were talking about. So it's completely unprecedented. Humans are going to be alone. And our institute is partnered closely with NASA to make sure when those humans go to Mars in the 2030s, they're going to come back healthy and sane.
So no pressure. No, seriously though, Dorit, thank you so much for helping us understand and kind of paint that picture. You mentioned when we were talking earlier that there's something called a third quarter effect, where people like me and my family who are kind of like still self-isolating, we're not like back out into our normal lives yet, we might be feeling that. Can you talk to us, and maybe all of America is, I don't want to like speak for other people's feelings, but can you talk a little bit about the third quarter effect and how, you know, you see it pop up in so many places?
Sure. NASA has been studying what happens to people on long duration missions in isolation in extreme environments. And Nicole and Cady talked about that, and David will as well, in analog settings. So researchers have discovered basically when you put people in conditions of extreme stress and in confinement, you see this in space flight with astronauts. You also see this in a study that the Russians did several years ago called the Mars 500, which was essentially they simulated a mission to Mars. It's a half mission to Mars, really. It was essentially 520 days. What you saw is that if you take the mission and you divide it into quarters, okay, people did okay in the beginning. There was still the high of, you know, closing the door and you're on this mission and this is very exciting, or even up in space. About halfway mark, you're still doing okay. You're halfway through. And then the third quarter hits and you're still quite a ways away from coming back home and from returning from the mission. And so that's when you typically see in research the dip in human performance and overall well-being. Whereas the last quarter, people are realizing, hey, I'm close to getting back home. The mission's almost over. I've been successful. They're feeling a lot better about themselves. And while we don't exactly know how long our mission is here with COVID being at home, I'm not really sure we're in the third quarter, but we might be. So if you anticipate, maybe we are in the third quarter, and perhaps right now it's dipping.
Okay, so so that makes me feel good. Like, it's not just me. It happens to astronauts. It happens, you mentioned too, like explorers of all kinds under crazy circumstances. So this is totally normal. It's not you, it's us, right? But tell us, like you said, there's a solution for this, like there's a cure for this kind of disease. And so some people have gotten puppies, some have doubled down on work or like thrown themselves into like aggressive bread baking. But you mentioned something, all those things have something in common, which you said is a sense of purpose. So talk to us about like that big idea, and how does it matter for NASA? How does it matter for us?
Yeah, so when you talk to all of these brilliant people, some of which you've heard from today, it's about focusing on the mission. It's about making something your mission. So yeah, these folks are astronauts. They have a mission to carry out in space. They have to catch the supply ship. They have to take care of the space station. But we all have a mission in our lives. And so we need to focus on that. And you mentioned puppies. Funny you should say that. So I've been isolating by myself here at home, and I've been focused. My mission was to continue running the Institute to help NASA and to fund incredible research. But my second mission, my personal mission, is a puppy. I have a pandemic puppy. I had to put him in his crate. He was whining during the whole thing. So essentially, you can find your own mission, and people who were able to focus on something, whether it be raising a puppy, whether it is educating your kids in the home, working on your marriage, baking, rearranging your closets, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a highly complicated mission, but you're focused on that.
I love that, because that gives us like a sense of like, okay, and it's not something you have to do every day, but it's like an idea of like, you got to commit to something larger, this real sense of purpose. certainly has been getting us through it. I have one last question for us. I know that a lot of Americans might grow up kind of thinking like, oh, I want to be an astronaut, and we sell Halloween costumes about it. But as you guys are learning at Trish, there are some personality types better suited to this than others. And so I wanted to end on a positive note because there are some people, some of us have more of these characteristics than others, but there are certain people who kind of are flourishing right now. And when we were talking, it's like people who are optimistic, people who have a real sense of mission. Kind of tell us a little bit more about like, maybe I know we can't all reinvent ourselves to get through the rest of the pandemic, but we all have parts of these things inside of us. What makes a great astronaut to get to Mars, and how can we see that reflected in ourselves is kind of what I'm asking.
So thanks for that. So you're right. I mean, people who can be focused on mission, who can get along with others, who think before they speak, all of those things are really important, as you heard from Emmanuel. But I think we can all do something that actually showed to be very effective in the Mars 500 simulation. The people that did really well, there was only a crew of 6, but a couple of them did pretty well. The important thing was to keep to a schedule. So one problem that people have during the pandemic is maybe they're up late watching TV because they don't have to be up early for work. Maybe they're taking naps during the day. And so their circadian rhythm is really screwed up. And that's not good because it's important to get a good night's sleep, to not screw up your circadian rhythm. So having a schedule is really important. Having exercise is really important. Focusing on good nutrition, focusing on your sense of purpose, and making sure that you have this routine and you stick to it. And so you don't know how long this thing is going to last, but you know it will end someday. And so just focus on your routine and stick with the mission.
I love it. Dorit, she has a message for America. So get on a schedule and stick with the mission. I'm kidding, but I super, super appreciate your time and your enthusiasm. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
It's a pleasure, Megan. Thanks for having us.
Heck yeah. Well, we are going to close our show with Dr. David Hilmers. He has an incredible resume, and the reason we've asked him to end our show is his story is possibly one of the most philosophical ones we've had on the program since I founded it in 2011. So I'm thrilled to close our show with you, David. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you and good evening. My name is David Hilmers, as Megan mentioned, and I feel a little bit like the batting last after all these incredible speakers that we've had tonight. And I've just been awed by their own stories. And I think as astronauts, we don't get to hear each other's stories very often. So it's been a real treat for me. But like most of you who are tuning in tonight, I'm experiencing the same isolation and loneliness that's part of these pandemic days that we have. I'm speaking to you tonight from Houston, where for the past 7 months now, I guess, I've been a frontline physician doing my best to treat those who suffer from COVID-19. Over the past years, I've been privileged to fly jets with the Marines, to serve as an astronaut on 4 space missions, to start medical school at the ripe old age of 42, and become deeply involved in global health as a physician. Now, I'm no different from any of you listening tonight who over the course of their lifetimes, particularly now, have experienced periods of feeling disconnected, isolated. So I want to pose a question to you. Where is it that we can turn when we get these feelings that seem to overwhelm us and just take over our existence? Well, the year was 1985, and it was after bedtime on my first day in space. Earlier that day, my crew had launched on the space shuttle Atlantis on its maiden voyage. I was strapped in my sleeping bag on the lower deck, but despite how tired I was, there was no way I was going to get to sleep that night. While my crew members slept, I floated out of my bag to the upper deck where I could look outside through the windows. It was that half of our 90-minute orbit around the Earth when we were in darkness. During the previous 24 hours, we'd been so busy with the mission details that we didn't have much time to look outside. So I turned down the cabin lights as I did, the most magnificent sight I had ever beheld appeared through the windows. Without the interference of clouds, the lights of civilization, and the atmosphere, the stars appeared with a brilliance and clarity that I'd never witnessed before. A great canopy of stars overhead and the winding trail of the Milky Way lay out before me, and it stretched to the horizons. In the distance, the lights from Earth seemed to reach out and touch the stars. It was almost as if heaven and earth were embracing. Each bedtime on that flight and on every one of my subsequent 3 space missions, sometime during the mission, I would go up to the dim cabin and spend time contemplating the stars. Although the lights on the Earth would change with man's daily activities, the stars never did. Even when I felt isolated from humanity, floating hundreds of miles above the Earth, the stars brought a constancy that gave me comfort. I could look at the stars on the horizon as if they were reaching down to console us here on Earth. I realized that this constancy, this faith in something that is never changing and will always be there for us, is something for which we all yearn. For some of us, it might be found in spirituality, for others in a loved one, or loved ones, for others in some ideal. For me, this image of the unchanging firmament has touched my spirit on countless occasions. I know that no matter what comes to pass, a glimpse of the heavens at night brings great comfort with hope for a better tomorrow and the knowledge of the ever faithful love of family, friends, and for me, from God. This image of the stars that I saw from space gave meaning to me at many, many other times in my life, both before and after my shuttle flights. Times when I felt disconnected, alone, so I would look to the heavens for peace. I remember as a young Marine lieutenant, far at sea, going to the flight deck on board ship on cold, moonless nights to gaze into the stars for solace from the loneliness. On other military deployments far from home during those years, a profound peace came from contemplating the sheer vastness and constancy of the heavens. Just as the stars represent the assurance that I can have in my life, they also motivated me to try to become maybe a source of a little hope and a little comfort for others. That desire led me to apply for medical school in 1991 as a Marine colonel, now in his 40s. It kept me going through 8 tough, long years of training in medicine and motivated me to devote much of my time these days and much of my energy to serving those in need around the world. I found that it's often through serving others and filling their needs that we can find comfort and fulfillment in our own lives. In the years to come, I would look time and again to the heavens to search for hope and mercy for those suffering around me, as well as for comfort for myself in distant lands. My first job after finishing residency and as an academic physician, I worked in sub-Saharan Africa treating AIDS patients. I shared their anguish when I had to tell them that the life-saving medications available in the West were unavailable and too costly for them, and even harder for their children. On medical missions, I looked above to the heavens amidst the fighting and violence in Iraq in 2003. I could see the need for hope looking into the eyes of the terrified victims of the devastating earthquake in Haiti in 2010. On dark nights on call in an Ebola treatment facility in Liberia, I looked to the stars for relief from the distress I felt for not being able to do more for the victims of Ebola. In sprawling refugee camps in East Africa and in Bangladesh, I marveled at the resiliency of these people who had lost everything and were now strangers in a foreign land. How could they cope? I wondered how they too had found hope for tomorrow amidst their suffering. Now, over the past several years, I've been part of a group providing medical care to patients in North Korea. At night in the countrysides, the lights go out and the stars are brighter than nearly anywhere on earth that I've been. Communication with the outside world in that land was sporadic, and at times the feeling of isolation was greater than I have ever felt in my life. But despite the differences between cultures and ideologies, the same stars shine for the North Korean people as they do for us. Amidst the isolation, the heavens reach down to touch both them and me. Well, today a new crisis has befallen us. In March, I returned to the US from my international travels to provide medical care in a local Houston hospital as the pandemic unfolded here. COVID-19 has separated me from my family and dear friends for 7 months now. I've witnessed the suffering and unfortunate deaths of many from this scourge. I, like many of you, have felt the sorrow and sheer helplessness and isolation that have resulted. Those stars, however, haven't changed since I viewed them from space, and I still look to them for hope. For me, they represent the faithfulness of God, the love of family and close friends, and the promise for a better tomorrow. I see these as permanent qualities that will never change. I can tell my loved ones to look above, and they know that I am looking at the very same stars as they are. It becomes a bond that ties us together, no matter what might befall us. So perhaps you can find your own unshakable rock, your own stars, whatever they may be. You don't need to go to space to find that. You should hold those things close and never let them go. And being a rock for others may allow you to find strength through your service to them. With a solid foundation like this, each of us can have the hope and assurance that helps us carry on, and we can surely endure the isolation and sadness that come with the conflicts, disasters, and yes, pandemics that will certainly appear again. For all of you, please stay safe and healthy, and thanks for letting me share this part of my life with you.
David, thank you so much for your story. I'm crying. I really, really appreciate your insight and your thoughtfulness about the constancy of the stars and how can you be like those lights to each other.
Well, thank you. It's very meaningful to me to just be able to express that. Sometimes just by being able to say the things in our heart, it makes us all feel better.
I feel better. I feel better now than I did when the show started. I hope our audience does too. With that, I'm going to pull together and we're going to bring up all of our storytellers. So David, thank you for telling your story. Nicole, thank you for telling your story. Emmanuel, thank you. Dorit, thank you for being our Q&A. And Cady, thank you for sharing your story too. I'd like to say thank you so much to our audience members for joining us this evening, and to Trish for being here and helping us connect with these astronauts and scientists, and to Humana for inspiring us to reach out to one another and realize that health is about the whole person, our hearts as well as our bodies. Thank you guys so much for watching tonight's show. I hope you share it with somebody that you love.